morning, beautiful people. It's great to be here with you today. I hope that you're all doing well. We're continuing our class on conflict resolution. And every week we're trying to start with reminding ourselves why conflict resolution is so important. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. That as Christians we're to strive to be peacemakers, to strive to create peace. But in order to do that, we need to be able to understand how to move through conflict. Because we've established that conflict in and of itself is not bad. In fact, in order to pursue peace, we sometimes have to initiate conflict. And we know initiates conflict. And so if conflict is entirely bad, Jesus would not have done it. And then in Romans chapter 12. Repay no one evil for evil, but give thought to do what is honorable in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. That we are to strive to live at peace, strive to be peaceable with all. But I like that in this case, Paul expresses, so far as it depends on you. That the reality is that despite how much we might try and create peace, despite how much we might try and treat people well, that ultimately peace requires at least two parties. And sometimes we can try all that we want to create peace, but somebody else might not want to. So as far as it depends on you, we should try and move through conflict well, to try and move towards a positive resolution. And we've said that a positive resolution is one that allows us to grow. For all conflict moves towards resolution. It's just a matter, is it negative or is it positive? For example, a negative conflict or a negative result might be that we say, I'm never going to have anything to do with you ever, ever, ever again. That did end the conflict. Now somebody's going to argue with me and say, well, the conflict was still underneath the surface. Okay, fine. But if we never continue to engage with it, then at the moment the conflict is done. But it wasn't a positive resolution in the way that we treated one another. So all conflict moved towards resolution. We want to move towards a positive resolution. Today we're picking up in the midst of our steps to resolution. We got through step one last week, and we began in step two. We said step one, or at least the first phase of resolution, is the recognition phase. That we have to recognize that there is, in fact, conflict. And the moment that we recognize there's a conflict, that we are to try and do something about it. That's why in Matthew chapter 18, we're told if your brother does something against you, go to him. And in Matthew chapter 5, we're told, if you realize that you have something against your brother, then you go. In other words, whether it is you who have been wronged or you who have done the wrong, as soon as we recognize that there's a problem, we start trying to move towards conflict resolution. We start thinking in terms of what is my contribution? What have I done to help bring this about? So the moment we begin to recognize it, we're beginning to move towards conflict resolution, but the first step is, first of all, recognizing that something exists. And that brings us to the engagement stage, which is what we're at now. We mentioned last week, we got through this, of Matthew chapter 7, that we are to recognize what it is that I have done. For all of us, in the midst of conflict, are contributing in some way. And so the first question we have to ask is, what is my role within this conflict? Now, inevitably, especially in marriage counseling, when we talk about this, somebody will say, well, what if I didn't do anything to bring this about? And so we ask the question, is it possible, is there a scenario in which you might be engaged in conflict, but you did nothing to help bring it about? What do you think? Do you think it's possible that you might be in the midst of a conflict and you have done nothing wrong at all? You have in no way contributed to bringing it about. What do you think? Okay, I see several yeses. Several of you aren't sure. But yes, of course it is. Okay, it takes two sides. It does take two sides, especially to resolve a conflict. And it's possible that you might be pulled into a conflict because perhaps you didn't realize that you'd done something to offend somebody else. Perhaps you didn't intend for words to be taken in a certain way. It is entirely possible for you to have done nothing to contribute to this particular scenario, but to be pulled into a conflict. I will say that usually is not the case, but it is possible. Usually we've contributed in some way, but it is possible. Regardless of whether we've contributed to it coming about or not, the moment there is a conflict, we are playing a role in whether that conflict remains or whether it is resolved. So we do play a role regardless of whether we brought it back, whether we helped bring it about or not. We do play a role in helping to bring it to some resolution. And so we ask the question, what is my state of mind? What is my state of heart as I move into this conflict? We talked about this one, going to your brother and going to them alone. This is where we ended last week. And we asked the question, why is it so important to go to the offending parties themselves alone? Why is it so important to just go between you and your brother alone? We mentioned two things. One, the idea of pride, that it is hard to say, I've done something wrong. It just is, because nobody likes to admit that they've done something wrong. And the moment that we add more people to that scenario, it becomes harder. And so it's now more likely that that conflict will spiral a little bit out of control. But the second reason is that conflict has a tendency to spread. And that's one of those scenarios where you can be pulled into a conflict that you never actually helped bring about, but now you're in it. Well, we want to try and prevent conflict from spreading. And so we want to go to just myself and my brother. Now, we did mention, if this is the case, we're only supposed to be between one person and another person, then what are we supposed to do about Paul in Galatians, who goes and confronts Peter in public? And we said the reason why is because in that particular case, Peter is in the midst of a conflict that has brought the entire church into it. And so Paul goes to all of the offending parties all at one time. So that's that particular scenario. Still following Matthew chapter 18 in terms of going specifically to those who were involved, but at that point, everyone was involved. All right, and that brings us to this. Colossians chapter 4 and verse 6. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. I'm curious, how does this passage, in your mind, how does it apply to conflict resolution? What do you think? How does this passage apply to conflict resolution? Okay, to think before you speak, okay? Okay, it's not just simply what you say, but how you say it. I don't know if it's the next lesson or the one after that. We're going to talk about nonverbal communication, and that how we say things. I hesitate to say that it's as important as what we say, because it might not be true, but it's awfully close. Because the way we say things matters. So how we phrase things in the midst of conflict with all of the emotions and things going on is important. How else does this apply? What do you think? Okay. Okay, having a little element of grace in the midst of our communication. All right, anything else? This passage makes me think of Mary Poppins. A spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. It kind of makes me think of that. And there's some truth in that. Because this passage doesn't ever say to water down truth. It doesn't ever say to compromise truth, but to be careful how we present it. Because it is possible for the truth to be used well or to be used as a weapon. We've seen it used as both. And sometimes truth, especially in the midst of conflict, can be used as a weapon, which really isn't moving us towards a positive resolution, even if it is the truth. Even, for example, let's say that in your relationship there have been things that have happened over the last several years that you really haven't addressed. And you've done what some couples do, and you've taken all those things and you put them in your back pocket, and now seems like a really great time to pull them out. Because you're in the middle of conflict, and you can win this conflict if you pull out all the things this person has done. Is that truth? Well, of course it is. This is what happened, right? Is that gracious? Of course not. And so we want our speech to be gracious, to be seasoned with salt, to leave a good taste in another person's mouth. And the reason why it's so important is it is hard to listen to one another. Have you noticed that? It is just hard. I'd really rather hear myself talk than hear you talk. That's not true, but at the same time, it kind of is. And everybody's that way. Why? Because if it weren't, we'd be better at listening. We really like to be able to say what we have to say. It's just hard to listen to one another. Since it's hard to listen to one another, we should do everything in our power to aid the other person in listening. Now, that doesn't mean that we can make them listen. I mean, you can tie somebody to a chair, but that doesn't mean that they're going to listen. They might look like they are, but that doesn't mean they're going to listen. Only they can allow themselves to listen. But we can try to aid their ability to listen. And part of the way we do that is our speech to be seasoned with salt, to aid the other person in listening so that communication is possible. We want to be careful how we phrase things. I want to be careful the tone of voice we use, the type of words that we use, to think before we speak like our parents told us. Otherwise, conflict that was small can begin to become bigger if everybody just begins to spout off. In Proverbs chapter 27, we come across this. Whoever blesses his neighbor with a loud voice, rising early in the morning, will be counted as cursing. So here's what this passage in my mind is saying. How many of you are morning people? Okay, how many of you are not morning people? Okay. When somebody who is a morning person and their very chippy voice, or chirpy, maybe both, comes to you in the morning and says, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you," and you just woke up, what do you want to do? That's what you want to do. Get out of my face. It's too early in the morning, right? If somebody wakes you up in the middle of the night and they're just so happy to see you, and "Oh, I love you so much," get out of my face. It's the wrong time. Same basic thing, that as we begin to engage in conflict resolution, we want to ask the question, is now a good time? I'm curious, what in your mind, what would be some time when it would be a bad idea to begin initiating conflict resolution? Or to begin to confront somebody else? What do you think? When would be a bad time for that to occur? Okay, when other people are around. Now, to be clear, sometimes we can't avoid it. It is possible. But if we can choose, when other people are around, it's not a good time. Okay? What else? When they're eating. When I'm eating, I'm happy to talk to you, but now's not the time. I want to eat. What else? When you're tired. Have you noticed that it's hard not only to think, but it's hard to engage, and it's hard to hear things that are hard to hear when you're tired? Don't do it when you're tired. Yeah.
When you can tell they're having a bad day.
Okay, if you can tell, if you know the other person just isn't in the right mental place, they're having a hard day, if you know something about their life, and man, they had a really rough week at work, this might not be the time.
I had to wait, I was told.
Oh, okay.
When there's not time, when you're on a limited amount of time.
Okay, that sometimes we recognize there's a time crunch, and we know, okay, to address this, it's going to take more than this time. And if we crunch it into this time frame, then nobody's really going to be paying attention or thinking. Sometimes you can't avoid that we need to address something right now, in which case you say, we need to address this further at another point in time. Or somebody comes up to you and says something to the effect of, "Hey, I have something I need to talk to you about." Okay, well, I can't do it right now, but I could do it. You get the idea. But recognizing when time limitations are a problem. Anything else?
You know, you get an itch.
Don't do it when you're itchy.
And, well, that's the thing. When there's a conflict, that means that there's a cloud hanging over your head, and you get this itch to settle it.
Mm.
And you don't care whether it's dinner time, you don't care whether it's football time, or whatever it is, you're going to get it off your back. And that's in the realm of conflict.
Okay.
And when you talk about loud voices and stuff like that just builds upon the tension.
Mm. What I understand you to be saying is when we feel ourselves all hyped up for conflict, might not be the time to engage in it. Am I understanding correctly? It's funny that there seem to be two types of conflict individuals, those who love it and those who hate it. Those who love it have to be careful they don't rush in too quick. Those who hate it have to be careful that they don't just avoid it all the time. But we don't want to rush in. It's interesting. Are you all familiar with the passage of "Do not let the sun go down on your anger"? Did you know it's a psalm? Did you know what the psalm says? Sit on your bed and contemplate what you've done. I'm paraphrasing. But notice how both don't let the sun go down on our anger. One says, I'm going to address this right now. One says, I'm in a bad spot at the moment. I need to do something. But sitting on my bed and contemplating where I'm at and making sure I'm in the right mental capacity isn't avoiding conflict. It's making sure that I'm in the right spot so that when we engage in conflict, or when we engage in conflict resolution, that we can move forward. Anything else? I thought I saw another. All right, cool. Don't approach somebody before dinner time. Why? Because you're hangry. And people who are hangry are mean people. And you're one of them. So we want to make sure that when somebody's tired, when we know that some of their needs aren't met, when we know there's something else on their mind, you guys know what it is. We want to try and avoid times whenever we're already irritated and frustrated because conflict makes it worse. So we want to try to make sure that we move through conflict at a proper time. Let's continue on. We want to make sure that we clearly state the conflict. There's an old story that's circulated for years. You might have heard of it. It involves three blind men. Three blind men come upon an elephant, and they each approach the elephant from a different perspective. One goes up towards its face, one approaches around from the rear, and one goes to the middle. And the one at the front says, man, it has just such this long appendage and these giant ears. An elephant must be this giant face with a small body. And somebody says, no, it has a really small tail, but really giant feet. No, it has a big center. Which one was right? Which one was wrong? All of them. They were all right, all wrong. That they each saw it from a different perspective. That sometimes perspective impacts our understanding of conflict. It often impacts our understanding of conflict. So I want to make sure right off the bat that we clearly state, what is this conflict? What do I perceive the conflict to be over? And why is that important? Okay, that we can have a tendency to chase these rabbits, and I'll be arguing about this and you be arguing about that, but if we can't agree what we're arguing over, then we're never going to make it anywhere. We're just going to keep chasing one another around and around and around. We're just going to get madder and madder at one another. Nothing's going to happen. So we have to make sure that we clearly state, this is what I understand the conflict to be. And part of it, and we'll talk about this more subsequent lessons, this is where a lot of listening takes place. Because oftentimes I just want somebody to hear what I'm upset about. And so if I hear, or if you hear that, okay, I understand you to be upset about blank, then now we're moving a little bit closer, not only because we can agree upon something, because I feel like somebody actually heard me and cared enough to hear. So I want to make sure that we clearly state what the conflict is. Oh, and Amos 3:3, the two walk together unless they have agreed to meet. So unless we agree upon what the conflict is, we're never going to be able to move forward and move through it. We want to identify possible resolutions, and we'll talk more about some of this a little bit later, but we want to identify what resolutions might be needed. We might do it both together, but we're also going to do it as an individual. Sometimes it's as simple as, oh man, I've done something wrong, and I need to say I'm sorry, I need to ask for forgiveness. Sometimes it'll involve compromise, and we'll talk more about compromise a little bit later, but compromise is where we're going to discuss possible solutions, possible opportunities, possible options. Some of it we'll get a little bit of what we want and a little bit of what we don't want all at the same time. We want to move towards agreement. In other words, we want to agree upon what the resolution is. Well, in order for conflict to reach a positive resolution, we all have to agree that this is in fact resolved, and we agree that this is how it was resolved. And then lastly, we want to move towards conclusion. The final phase is conclusion. And usually what this looks like is a summary of, okay, we agreed that this is the ultimate outcome. We agreed that this is resolved why. And it's important that it's clearly stated at the end, we agreed that this was resolved in this way, or we agreed upon this. Why is it so important at the end to clearly state, this is what we agreed?
For the same reason it was important to clearly state what the conflict was. You clearly state what it is, and then when you think you've agreed to a resolvement, you have to agree that, yes, this resolves our differences.
Okay, that we want to say that, yes, we actually have agreed, that it's not just in my mind that we've agreed and we've resolved everything, but do you agree that we've resolved everything? Okay, what else? Perspective, okay, what do you mean? It doesn't seem like it should be that long away, but that corner right there makes it a really long trip.
Perspective, like, you could be agreeing, but what I see in that agreement may vary a little bit.
Okay, so be honest. How many of you knew how to get your parents to say yes with them not realizing what they said yes to? How many of you knew when was a good time to approach your parents because you were more likely to get a yes, and you could phrase things in such a way that they might very well not entirely realize what exactly they had agreed to? Same basic thing can take place within conflict. That we can both say, oh yeah, that's right. And neither one of us have really an idea what we agreed to. And we think we agreed to two separate things, and now when we come out of that, now when it's clear that suddenly we didn't agree at the same time, not only do we have that other conflict to work through, but now we have another conflict because somehow we didn't agree. So we want to make sure that we clearly state at the end, this is what we agreed to. Yes? Yes? Okay. We can go from there. Yeah.
it's better to get forgiveness than it is permission.
It's better to get forgiveness than it is permission. Okay? I've found that sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. It depends upon what it is. Because sometimes you... Oh, I see. I'm following now. Okay. Yes, you can get away with that when you're a kid. When you're an adult, it's a little harder to. Anything else before we move on to the next thing? Once, twice, thrice. All right. We're going to start talking in terms of communication. For conflict resolution involves and necessitates communication. I'm curious, in your mind, why, well, first, what is communication? What do you think? What is communication? By the way, it's not this. An exchange of ideas, okay? So communication is an exchange of ideas, all right? Anybody else? Yeah?
To communicate, you have to speak, and then when the other person is speaking, you have to listen.
Okay? That, if we built on this idea, it's not only the exchange of ideas, it is the exchange and the receiving, something along those lines, of the message that was sent. That it's not only the sending of the message, but it's the receiving of the message at the same time. Anything else? What is communication? Yes.
You have to understand, and it's not being, can't think of the word, but there are a difference between how men think and women think.
Okay.
Okay, it just is. Whenever Leanne comes home from anything she's been doing, I stop everything I'm doing and I say, how to go? Because I know she's going to unload on everything that happened. And if I'm watching TV and she's talking and I'm not getting it, it's a disaster.
Okay. So you have received some of the signals and learned from them. I'm proud of you. It is the sending and receiving of signals and information. We're going to come back to that because the next question, I'll go ahead and go here before we ask the next question.
I found with my mate that he thought so much faster than I did that I learned to write letters.
Okay? All right. That sometimes it's not just simply a verbal exchange of ideas and listening of ideas. Sometimes it involves something else, some other medium. Anything else? What is communication? Ultimately, we can define communication as the sending and the receiving of signals. It does involve speaking, but not merely speaking, for we also communicate signals through the nonverbals that we already mentioned. We also, maybe through a different medium, can communicate signals. It's not merely the speaking, which is often what we think about with communication, the I'm going to say something. But if we're both just throwing ideas at a wall, communication is not happening. That's just called verbal barrage. But instead, communication is not only the sending of the signal, but the receiving of the signal, which leads to this question. What makes communication difficult? Why is it hard? What do you think? You're charged up and ready to go. I could see it. You're taking that big breath.
Not that I was a salesman for like 20 years, but you also have to know the other person's makeup, the other person's background, the other person's experiences with life can skew the way they think and what they're saying. I really don't like conflict. Leanne, she has grown up with communication going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. It's no big deal with her, but boy, does it get under my skin.
Okay? It's interesting to me how oftentimes you have somebody who loves conflict and somebody who doesn't love conflict, and they somehow decide to get together. And, I mean, that's great. I guess opposites attract, but I find that very interesting.
I don't love it.
Okay, you don't love it.
I just deal with it.
Just deal with it. Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds like something that somebody who loves conflict would say.
Sometimes you need someone to mediate the conflict.
Okay, there might be times that necessitate a third party coming in to help. Okay.
That's right. And stubbornness is a big problem.
Okay, so up to this point, things that impact conflict are stubbornness and then just personal experience, personal makeup. All right? Yes, ma'am. What makes communication difficult?
It could be that you are in a selfish mode and you want it to be about you, and you're not going to receive anything else until it's settled within you. So you're not listening to what they're saying because it's about you.
Okay, so sometimes what makes communication difficult is not because the other person is not listening, but because I'm failing to communicate well. All right?
Another factor, I think, is the tendency to be formulating a response to the other person's desire or wants, whatever, while they're speaking. That's a hard habit to break.
Sometimes communication is less about my failure to be able to speak well and more about my failure to listen to what the other person is communicating. I heard her voice. Oh, there you are. Oh, bingo. Okay.
I think two big factors, and they're so closely related.
Okay.
One, we're scared to death whatever idea we come up with to resolve whatever conflict exists is somehow going to meet rejection. And we're so focused on that fear of rejection that while they're presenting their side of things, we're not listening. We're already working on the next thing that's going to come out of us. I think Chris hit it on the head. Right? We're already formulating a response and fail completely to hear what the other person's saying. I think most of conflict resolution is about listening.
Okay. I'm glad you think so, because we're going to spend a lot of time talking about listening. Because I think listening is important not only to resolve the conflict, but hopefully to avoid them in the first place. All right. Anything else? Anything else that makes communication difficult? Yes.
Here's another Star Trek reference for you.
Oh, no.
There was a society that spoke entirely metaphorically, and there was no one else could communicate with them because they didn't have the background to understand what the metaphors meant. And it makes me think of Jesus talking in parables. He would talk in parables because that's what the people understood. He would talk very agrarian, talk about planting seeds, things like that, because that's what they understood. If there's not a common background, I think that can lead to a lot of misunderstandings and lack of communication.
Okay. So a difference in background impacts communication. And then
I think we get into trouble because we think we know what the other person is thinking.
That sometimes, especially when we do have a previous relationship with the other individual, that we can jump to conclusions about what we're pretty sure they're already at, or pretty sure what their motivations are, and begin to act upon those, and even begin to formulate responses early based on what we thought we already knew, when that may or may not be true. All right. Anything else? Yes. That we have this funny little thing called nonverbal communication that begins to impact things, which can be a challenge because when a person's face looks a certain way, it doesn't necessarily mean what we think it means, but it does communicate something and has a signal. So if we were to put everything together that all of you said, here's what makes communication difficult. There's the signal that I intend to send. There's the signal that I actually send. There's the signal the other person heard. There's the signal the other person thought they heard. There's the signal that I thought that they thought they heard. You get the idea. And so we've got all these signals mixing at the same time, and even if we phrase everything perfectly, and even if the other person listens explicitly, explicitly? No, that's not the word I'm looking for. Say again? No, if they listen well, it's not explicitly, anyway, it doesn't matter. Impeccably. Even if they listen impeccably, then it can still be wrong. Even if they go through all the right things, because it could still be wrong. Why? Because, well, they may have heard, but they may not have heard what I thought, or what they thought that they heard. You get the idea. And so we get all these signals that mix, all impacted by the things you guys have said, our ability to listen, our previous experiences, our genetic makeup, for those of us who struggle to hear anyways, all the things going on around us. Yes, sir.
I can think of two examples in my ministry of thinking that people understood when they didn't.
One was I was teaching a group of Joy Bus students, and this one preteen who was really, really brilliant and intelligent and involved, and she raised her hand in the class and she said, "Why do we sing that God's not great?" And I said, "When do we sing God is not great?" She said, "How great thou art." And so I thought, well, I'll fix this. And I turned around, I wrote on the board, "How great thou art." And she looked at me with a puzzled look, and I knew something was wrong. I said, "What does that say?" She said, "God's a picture." So she didn't, and then there was another case where someone got upset with me because I preached on the need for disciplining our children. And she thought every time I said discipline, I meant beat your kid.
All those things come to bear, our previous experiences, our previous understanding. Right up here.
We also, I just remember this when from my early adult life. We can listen with an attitude. Like, my mom would tell me something, and I was like, "Oh my goodness, oh Mom." And my friend could say the exact same thing, the same words, and I'm like, "Oh, you're right."
Those are the times as a parent you just kind of want to rip your hair out. I've told you this umpteen times. But remember we talked about, I think it was the second lesson with the idea of relationship, that the previous relationship baggage that we bring ends up impacting our ability to listen, which impacts those signals. Yes?
Same lines as Dave has pointed out, and also to point out what, I don't think we've really said this, but race has something to do with it. You're Italian, you're from Africa, you're from a different part of the United States. My first experience from growing up in Colorado and going to Abilene Christian College, I went there and I sat in chapel, and it was before most people had got there. Two guys behind me. I stood up when it was all over, and they started talking to me. I had to excuse myself because I didn't understand a word they said.
Okay, language barriers can become a challenge. Even if we speak the exact language. For example, what is barbecue? Say again? Barbecue is lettuce.
Letters.
One more time. I'm going to get it at some point. What is barbecue? Okay, a sauce. It's a type of cooking. What is barbecue? It depends upon what region you're from.
Different in different places.
Now, I'm using a somewhat funny example in that even when we are all familiar with what something is, even when we can all understand the words impeccably and perfectly, because I speak so great, right? Even when we understand all those things, we can still misunderstand. Because barbecue depends on where you're from. Because I didn't realize that barbecue could be anything until I moved west of the Mississippi. Because you can barbecue anything, but where I grew up, barbecue is pulled pork. That's what it is. It's nothing else. It's just pulled pork. So it just depends upon where you're at. Well, the same basic thing, that as we're communicating, as we're sharing our ideas and sharing thoughts, it's all being filtered through our previous experiences, all being filtered through our ethnicity and through our gender and all those different things, and we're trying to understand what the other person said. So it's incredibly difficult, is my point, which leads to this question. If it's really hard to do, then why do it at all? If it takes so much effort, then why communicate? If it's such a pain, why communicate? What do you think? Okay, if you're not communicating, you don't have a relationship, sure you can have a relationship without communicating. Sure you can. It depends upon the type of relationship. But it is possible for two people to coexist and not communicate. Okay, but we don't have a good relationship.
Separate people that exist.
Okay, so we're saying that if we value relationship, we have to communicate.
Even at work, you have to communicate.
Okay,
Depending on how deep of a relationship you have with people, you can communicate very surfacely with some people, but you still have to find a way to be understood by them
Okay?
to whatever depth you need that understanding from that other person.
Okay, so communication is the vehicle by which to grow relationship. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? Well, if it's so difficult, why bother with communication at all? Yeah.
Because we learned from each other.
Okay? Because the moment that I arrogantly arrive at the conclusion that I already know everything and can learn nothing from anybody else is the moment I'm in a lot of trouble. And so in order to be able to learn from one another, in order to be able to grow, we have to be able to communicate. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
The lack of communication is communication. That's telling me a lot.
All right? So we're saying that even if we choose not to intentionally engage in communication, we end up communicating. Okay? So why communicate? If it takes so much effort and so much work, if it's such a pain and involves so much intentionality, why do it at all in the first place? Yes, ma'am? To get peace of mind? Okay. What do you mean by that?
Well, if you're in conflict, you're always thinking about it, and the more you think about it, the madder you get. But if you go and you talk to the person about it, you've cleared your heart.
Okay.
So now your mind is at peace because you're not thinking about the conflict anymore. Now you're happy. Oh, I'm so glad I talked to them. It's over with.
Okay. All right. So in order to bring about peace not only in our relationship but in myself. Okay? Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
I've had different positions where I've had to, I didn't know their language, they didn't know mine. But in my positions, it was we had to accomplish something. So if you don't communicate, and I was thinking to Tower of Babel when God made it where nobody can communicate what happened. Nothing got done, it didn't get finished. And if we don't communicate, nothing gets done, nothing gets finished. We're just kind of stuck. And so throughout my life, I had to learn to communicate because in my positions, we had to get things done. And you had to learn and figure out how can I get them to understand what I want them to do.
Okay. So in order to be able to move forward, all right. Yes, sir.
I am.
He really is. He won't need to go to the gym for days.
I think we bother to try to resolve conflicts because we care about the person or we care about the subject or both, usually both.
Okay. So we're kind of back to where we started with why does conflict happen? Well, it's because we care, because we have common ground. Either we care about the other person, we care about what is taking place, something in there is important to us, so therefore we feel a need to be able to communicate. All right?
Roger brought up the difference between men and women. My husband would say, you have to tell me, because we would be on different levels of communication.
Okay.
But he'd say, you have to tell me. You know, I'd be mad and he wouldn't know why.
Okay. Well, let's go off that one for a minute. Why must we explicitly communicate, especially with language? For it's possible to communicate in a variety of different ways. Why must we intentionally communicate? Because no one can know what another person is thinking unless they tell you. Now, somebody's going to say, well, but actions speak louder than words. Yes, I know actions are a language. However, their motivation as to why they did what they did, you won't know. Maybe, if you observed them over a long period of time, perhaps you might get a glimpse of their motivation. Maybe. Because we can all do the same action, but have done it for a variety of reasons. For example, if I were to go out and grab the trash can and dump it here in the middle, and several of you decided to clean it up, some of you would be cleaning it up because, oh, well, everything needs to look nice. We need to put everything in its place, and everything has a place. Some of you would say, man, I'm concerned about who is going to be here and how that's going to impact our worship, and so you're cleaning it up for that reason. Some of you are just going to feel the OCD need to take care of something because it's out of place. You get the general idea. Say again? But there's different motivations for all of those, even though it was the same action for everybody. And so we wouldn't know what you were thinking and why you did what you did unless you told us. And that leads to the very last question that we're going to wrap up fairly simply because I have 2 minutes left. You mentioned that communication and relationship go hand in hand. So why bother with relationship? If relationship requires communication and communication is a pain, why bother with it? And why does that matter? So if we remember, in the beginning, God creates the heavens and the earth. And remember what he says, let us make man in our own image. That God exists in community from the very beginning, and we are now in community. And God immediately says it's not good that man should be alone, and instead brings woman so that there could be community, that we have to have community. There was a study years ago, and I wish I could find it. I haven't been able to find it in a while. But it was a Russian study that had to do with specifically touch with babies and the need for connection. And if you remember the study, you know they divided the group into two. And those who got touch did fine, but those who didn't, they actually stopped the study because the babies who didn't get touch were dying, and they were dying at a high rate. That we needed community, or they needed community. We need community. It is essential, and so therefore we must communicate to have that community because we need one another, and so therefore communication is essential, especially in conflict resolution. Because we're not going to understand what the other person is saying, not going to understand what the other person is thinking, not going to understand what the other person needs or how to move through this conflict apart from communication. And so communication is essential for our relationship, for our connection, and ultimately so that we can exist within society, within this world. Any comments as we wrap up? Yes.
Also on the same level of like education. Some books I pick up, I can't understand them. It's over my level. Others are easy. So let me read you something that I did to illustrate. I woke up with a conundrum, wondering if it was really an epiphany. I decided to masticate on the subject while I matriculated to school.
Okay, that cleared it up for us. We have to be able to communicate to have relationship and to be able to move through conflict. Next week, we'll pick up talking in terms of more of how we can effectively communicate. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking in terms of how we can listen and how we can communicate, because in order to move through conflict resolution, we have to be able to communicate. Let's pray and we'll be done. Dear Father, Lord, we're so thankful. We're so thankful for one another, so thankful for your Son that allows us to be connected. Lord, we ask that you help us to pursue conflict resolution positively. We ask you help us to listen to one another and to strive to represent you well. Lord, we love you and pray to be with you in Christ's name. Amen.